Good afternoon, and welcome to another installment of our ongoing Nonprofit Leadership and Engagement Education Series. I am Joanne Nazer, Nonprofit Leadership and Engagement Manager at the Washington County Community Foundation. Thank you for joining us today, to learn from our content expert about advocacy, awareness, and action. I'm so excited about this session. It's my honor to introduce Todd Papasergi, Esquire, with the Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association. He is General Counsel and Vice President of Government Affairs, so he is an expert on lobbying efforts. Thanks so much for presenting today, Todd, and for your work and your volunteer spirit.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks for having me here today. Glad to see everyone online today. As Joanne said, today's session is going to involve advocacy, awareness, and action, specifically covering the legal landscape of advocacy, lobbying, and electioneering within nonprofit organizations. And as we get into the midterm elections, this really matters now. Nonprofits, especially 501c3 organizations, often hold back from advocacy because they're unsure of what's allowed. My goal today, hopefully, is to clear that up so that you can engage more confidently with your membership and the communities at large. We're going to walk through some key definitions, look at what each of the main types of tax-exempt organizations can and cannot do, and maybe even discuss some practical strategies if we have some time at the end. Hopefully, by 1 o'clock today, you'll feel equipped to be able to take advocacy and maybe even a little bit more out into the communities in your membership without feeling that you're going to run afoul of IRS rules. So with that, I'm a lawyer, so I got to throw the legal disclaimer out there first. Again, today's discussion is going to be very, very important. It's going to be very informative, but it is for general educational purposes only. Nothing within today's discussion will constitute legal advice nor constitute an attorney-client relationship. Also, remember, we're going to be mainly talking about federal law and federal regulations today. There are some state Pennsylvania-specific laws that could vary significantly, as well as any other local or other jurisdictions that people may be involved with. Key takeaway for that is always consult a qualified legal professional with the facts and circumstances that may be specific to your organization's situation. So the Reverend Adam Russell Taylor, who's the president of an organization called Sojourners, captures exactly why today's topic really matters. The core message we're going to discuss today is advocacy isn't just permitted for nonprofits, it's vital to democracy itself. The nonprofit sector clearly represents communities that might otherwise go unheard or may fly under the radar, and not in such a good way. Your voice as leaders in the nonprofit world or attorneys who are counseling those in the nonprofit world, you can make the voice turn from not just mundane, educational, but also help shape policy conversations, and that's essential. Strengthening nonprofit advocacy helps ensure that our local communities, the state, the country lives up to our ideals, and maybe even the ideals of your own organization. So you need to keep that kind of framing in mind, and what the Reverend Taylor is saying here when you think about what you want your own organization to be doing, and perhaps more importantly, saying. So let's start off with some definitions and distinctions when it comes to the nonprofit world and advocacy and lobbying itself. So we've got three main baskets of the types of, let's call it educational or political speech, that nonprofit organizations can get involved with. The first is advocacy. This is our broadest category, and as we'll come to find out, the safest category for any nonprofit organization. This is informing and educating your donors, your stakeholders, legislators, the public at large about your mission, your programs, and your causes. This is wide open, right? Think of this mainly as you're in the schoolhouse. You are the teacher. You are the educator. When you are advocating, you are teaching people not just about what your nonprofit does, but the ways that specific missions and programs can help out the community as a whole. Next is lobbying. This is the carrying on of propaganda or otherwise attempting to influence legislation. And I have legislation underlined and bolded because that's really important. We'll get into that in a second as to why legislation is important in the IRS definition and some of the other nuances that can come around with that. Lobbying itself refers to actions that strive to influence lawmakers, specifically legislators, but certain key executive, judicial, or appointed officials as well, that favor a certain cause. The important nuance on lobbying is it often includes a call to action, but it can also just simply be expressing a viewpoint on specific legislation to an elected or appointed official. That many times is what we would call grassroots lobbying. You're not talking about a specific bill or a specific piece of legislation, but you're talking about, for example, abortion issues in general to a legislator. That could be considered grassroots lobbying because that could easily be foreseen to lead into specific types of legislation. And then finally, electioneering. This is the most restricted aspect into what nonprofits can or cannot do. And this concerns directly or indirectly participating in or intervening in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for a public office. This includes monetary contributions or in-kind contributions to political campaigns, as well as verbal or written statements in favor of or against a specific candidate. So we're going to talk about three specific types of 501c nonprofit organizations today. And I think mostly everyone here today is involved in a 501c3 charitable organization. As we all know, C3s cover a wide range of different types of missions and visions: religious, charitable, scientific, educational, literary, public safety, amateur sports, prevention of cruelty to children or animals. These are actually provisions that are specifically mentioned in Section 501 of the Internal Revenue Code. And there are two very specific how do I want to say it, guide rails within Section 501c3 when it comes to what charitable organizations can and cannot do when it comes to their advocacy, their lobbying, and their electioneering. So before we get into the yellow shaded area here, the first thing I want to talk about real quick is advocacy. As long as you are essentially educating, you can say and do whatever you want, okay? As we get into things like lobbying and then electioneering, which is in the red here, there are very, very strict rules and consequences when it comes to 501c3 organizations. The lobbying restriction is what we have here highlighted in yellow, that no substantial part of your activity as a nonprofit 501c3 organization can speak to propaganda or otherwise attempting to influence legislation. Now, what exactly does that mean? What does substantial part of your activities mean? A lot of people think, well, I'm a nonprofit. I can't talk about anything political at all. And what we're going to talk about here in a little bit is that is absolutely not the case. As a 501c3 organization, you can absolutely get into political issues. You just have to be careful on how you do it. And that's what we're going to talk about. The red part, though, 501c3s cannot participate in or intervene, including in the publishing or distributing of statements, any political campaign for any candidate for public office. As we'll talk about again in a little bit, this is an absolute no. There's no other way to put it. When it comes to 501c3s, can we get into the political arena? Yes. Can we get involved in specific elections in the political arena? The answer to that is absolutely no. A real world example of this, for example, is the IRS has um, they have opinions in the public domain where organizations have absolutely lost their 501c3 status simply for speaking to a election within their newsletter, for spending too high a percentage of money or time on lobbying. You need to coordinate your kind of political arena activities with your mission, your vision, and your educational setting. Now, when we get into two other of the main types of 501c organizations that I think we're all dealing with kind of on a daily basis, we're talking about C4s and C6s. C4s are really called civic leagues and social welfare organizations. I think in the grand scheme of things, we think of these 501c4 organizations as the ones who can have a little bit more of political leeway when it comes to what they do on a daily basis. And that's true to a certain extent. There's a key difference between C3s and C4s and C3s and C6s, and that there is much more flexibility on lobbying and some political activity. As we'll talk about later on in the presentation today, though, even C4 organizations are not strictly political organizations. There are still a lot of restrictions on what C4s can do. C6s, chambers of commerce, trade associations, bar associations. I know Kathy Sable and Stacy are here today from the Washington County Bar. These are 501c6 organizations where I work at the Pennsylvania Independent Oil and Gas Association, also a 501c6. They're not organized for profit. There's no private benefit to any of these organizations. There are similar lobbying flexibilities with C6s as there are with C4s. The big trade-off here that enables the flexibility, as we'll talk about later, is when it comes to tax deduction for your dues or your otherwise participation in a C4 and a C6. The tax subsidy when it comes to C4 and C6 organizations is smaller. So Congress has made a policy decision to allow more political latitude with C4 and C6 organizations as opposed to a C3 because of the tax consequences involved. The bottom line when it comes to a C3, a C4, or a C6 is that the type of 501c organization that you have and the designation you have, that determines your entire playbook for advocacy, lobbying, and political activity. So let's now get down into the weeds when it comes to those three types of issues: advocacy, lobbying, and electioneering. I think in my entire slide deck, what I'm about to show you is the most empowering slide in the entire deck. And that's because the answer to the question of should we advocate is an unequivocal yes. Advocacy is 100% the lifeblood of any nonprofit organization. It's how you advance your mission vision. It's how you build your guiding principles. It's how you build awareness in the community about who you are, what you do, when you do it, where you do it, why you do it, and how you do it. And more importantly, it's going to attract monetary and in-kind support for your organization. So when we talk about it being the lifeblood, right? Not only is it essential, it can lead to legislative help, even if it's indirect, legislative help for the causes that your organization helps to further. Again, financial contributions. If no one knows what you're doing, no one's going to be able to give you money to fund your organization. And the key here is carrying on the activities that you do, the language that you get out into the world, the events that you hold in an educational manner. As long as you are teaching people and groups about what it is you do, and you are connecting that education to the mission, vision, and the guiding principles of your organization, you cannot go wrong. the IRS cannot come after you. Keep everything to your mission vision and move forward. And that holds true for C3s, C4s, and C6s. So, what are some of the examples of things we're talking about here? Green light advocacy, right? Number one, invite, invite, invite. And it can be from Joe Schmo on the street all the way up to Senator McCormick and beyond, right? When we're talking about inviting people, it doesn't matter who you invite. Even as a 501c3, you are 100% permitted to invite legislators to come to your events so that you can educate them on what it is you are doing. Gets a little tricky if legislators are going to speak at your event, but it's not necessarily a full-blown red light. Legislators and other elected officials can absolutely come and speak to your event as a 501c3, so long as they are not speaking about specific legislation, so long as they're not speaking about their election coming up. I would not do it, for example, in an election year. I would do it in an off-election year so that you cannot be accused of electioneering. But if, for example, child advocacy and child welfare is your mission vision and is a specific goal or anything like that of a legislator, they can absolutely come to your event and speak about child welfare things generally, so long as it does not touch on specific legislation or an election. So galas, dinners, you can build up these events by having high-profile people come and speak at your event. Newsletters and written materials, get out into the world, especially electronically, what it is you are doing. Same thing with mailing and distribution lists, although, those are kind of falling by the wayside these days as we get more into social media and making sure that we're using the digital world to our advantage. And again,
Can I just say,
go ahead,
if
Joanne.
so, if you invite a elected official to a gala and dinner, of course, there's a cost uh, associated with that. Is that okay, or is there any ramifications to that?
So many times, first of all, elected officials, especially when they're coming to speak at a nonprofit, are not permitted to have their ticket gifted to them, are not allowed to receive a gratis ticket or a gratis invitation. We just had our largest event of the year last month. We had officials from the Federal Department of Transportation come and speak at our event. They weren't even allowed to eat breakfast with us or have lunch. He had a cup of our coffee, and even that, frankly, was he was a little leery about. So don't be surprised if you offer an elected official a free ticket or a dinner in exchange for coming to speak at your event, and they may have to say no in that regard.
I have to say that I had a meeting with a state person, department. It could have been DCED, and they refused water. They wouldn't
Yeah.
take a bottle of water. So just FYI.
Yeah. And especially at the state level, Governor Wolf, when he was the governor, he imposed an extremely strict no gift sort of rule on all state agencies that he had control over. Governor Shapiro has loosened that a bit, but there are some state agencies who have stuck with the Wolf rule. And the Wolf rule absolutely talked about exactly what you just said, Joanne. If they were going to speak for half an hour, they had to bring their own water with them. So again, the magic phrase in all of this when it comes to advocacy efforts is educational manner. As long as you're informing and educating rather than pushing a specific legislative agenda, you're in the clear. Period. End of story. So there's a common mistake here. Organizations will oftentimes self-censor themselves out of fear, even when their activities are clearly educational activity. You can't leave this tool on the table because, frankly, it may be the most vital tool that you have in your tool belt. So again, invite, 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 and do your events in an educational manner. Get people through your doors, show them your work, educate them on your work, and let the impact of your work then speak for itself. So the next one, should nonprofits engage in lobbying efforts? And now I'm going to bring out every lawyer's favorite phrase, it depends. And the answer definitely shifts here, right? So again, let's harken back to the definition of lobbying. Lobbying is the influencing of legislation, and the IRS defines legislation specifically. It is an act of Congress, any state legislature, local council, or similar governing body with respect to acts, bills, resolutions, or similar items, or by the public in referendum, ballot initiative, constitutional amendment, or similar procedure. Importantly, it does not include actions by the executive, judicial, or administrative bodies of a government. So what's important there in the executive, judicial, or administrative body sense is especially when we're dealing with our local governments. If you think about the Washington County Commissioners, if you think about your local Board of Supervisors, if you live in a township, or even sometimes your city or borough council, many times those those governmental bodies are sitting in kind of a quasi legislative executive role. The Washington County Commissioners, for example, absolutely comprise two of the branches of government in Washington County. They are both the legislature and the executive when it comes to Washington County. So you need to be very careful as a 501c3, especially when you are speaking with local politicians in regard to some sort of governmental matter that may be before that board. Does that mean that you cannot go and speak in public comment on behalf of your 501c3 on a specific bill or resolution of the Washington County Commissioners? No, that does not mean that at all. But what it does mean is you can't go see Commissioner Magi beforehand and say this piece of legislation is no good for us. You also may want to be a little bit weary when it comes to that in your public comment forum as well, even when speaking on behalf of your 501c3. But you can certainly turn speaking about a specific piece of legislation or a resolution that may be before the county commissioners, for example, and turn it into an educational advocacy setting. Just use your words appropriately, right? But when we talk about kind of moving up into state and federal jurisdictions, this is where the distinction between the executive and the legislature really becomes more stark, and you have clearer guide rails. So, for example, for a 501c3 that may be in the environmental space, are you allowed to write a comment to DEP or EPA on a proposed EPA regulation? The answer to that is 100% yes. But can you urge your senator to vote for legislation that may curtail that EPA regulation? And the answer to that is that would constitute lobbying. Now, as a 501c3, does that mean you can't do it? No. And we'll get into that in a second as to what those guide rails are. But now you're getting more into the category of lobbying as opposed to advocacy or not lobbying, because what you're doing does not involve legislation specifically. So that distinction between what is and what is not legislation matters enormously, because many activities that nonprofits worry about simply don't fall under the IRS definition of legislation. So, practical tip here, especially for our C3s in the room. When you are evaluating the activity or the speech that you want to proffer out in the community, ask yourself first and foremost, does this involve legislation? And simply put, if it does not involve legislation, then it is not lobbying. But again, what if it is lobbying? Does that mean as a 501c3 organization that I cannot engage in any sort of lobbying whatsoever? And the answer to that is no. So let's break down two types of lobbying that are out there and the specific rules for these in regard to your organization. So first of all, we have what's called direct lobbying. This is what we all think about. House Bill 123 has been put out into Congress or the General Assembly for publication, and you hate it. So it'll damage your organization. So you want to contact members or employees of a legislative body. And let's remember here, lobbying is not just calling your senator, but it's also calling your senator's staff to propose, support, or oppose legislation. This is what we call direct lobbying. Then there's grassroots lobbying, and that's urging your membership or the public to contact legislators or their staff. You put into a newsletter, hey, you need to call your senator to support House or Senate Bill 456 because that's going to help our organization. That will also be considered lobbying. Now,
Todd,
yes, Joanne.
we have a question does asking for the creation of certain legislation constitute lobbying?
Yes, it does. So legislation here is any legislation that is out in the public already or the potential for legislation. So yes, it does. So when we come to a 501c3, again, does this mean because you are a C3 charitable organization, nonprofit, that you cannot engage in lobbying? And the answer to that is no. You can engage in lobbying. Now, proceed with caution, right? A substantial amount of your activities cannot be lobbying, and all lobbying should be reported on your Form 990 Schedule C, okay? Now, what does substantial mean? This is the big $64,000 question that all 501c3s who want to wade in the water of lobbying always want answered. The IRS doesn't tell us, because why would they? It's a vague facts and circumstances approach. There are two approaches into figuring out whether you are doing a substantial amount of lobbying within the whole totality of your activities as a 501c3 organization. The first is the substantial part test. Rule of thumb is about 5% of your total activities. If you do more than 5% of your total activities in the lobbying space, then you have probably gone into the substantial part realm of lobbying, and that is what is going to put your 501c3 designation then at risk. There's also an expenditure test. This is Form 5768 that would be attached to your Form 990. There are clear dollar thresholds based on the exempt purpose and the size of your organization. You need to talk to your accountants and your tax advisors about what formulation within the expenditure test goes into your 501c3. But this is more of a math formula-based way to see whether you have crossed the boundary from permissible lobbying into it being a substantial part of your test. Or of your organization. Joanne, I see comments coming in my little red flashy hot and heavy here. So do we want to stop there for a second?
Oh, I just want to say that the question was asked, will the slides be shared with those participating today? And we certainly have that, and we'll certainly send it out. So it was just that comment and a thank you.
Got it.
Thank you for your slides.
So now when we come to C4 and C6s, as we talked about at the beginning of the presentation today, it opens up a little bit, right? And this is, again, because the tax consequences of being a member or an organization that runs a C4 or a C6 is somewhat pulled back. Now, especially when we think about C4s, we think about C4s being broad-based political organizations. And again, that's just not true. An unlimited amount of lobbying is permitted, but the lobbying must first be related to the stated tax-exempt purpose of the C4 or the C6 organization. I'm in the oil and gas, environmental, and energy space. I cannot go do an unlimited amount of lobbying on abortion issues. That is not what my C6 organization was created for. So you need to make sure that it is tied to your tax-exempt purpose. And again, the rules for lobbying when it comes to nonprofit organizations are very strict because the contributions to 501c3 organizations are always 100% tax deductible, and the contributions or your dues really related to C4 or C6 associations have tax consequences associated with them. You know, and the reason for this is that C4s and C6s are again permitted unlimited lobbying, but the lobbying and political expenses, they always make up a portion of the member dues or the contributions that then make them non-deductible for the member donor. So the organization, the C4 or the C6 organization, essentially has a choice to make, and you must pick one of these because again, not all of the dues or contributions to a 501c4 or C6 organization are tax deductible to the donor or the member. So the choice that your organization needs to make is one, or part A, option A, are you going to notify and calculate for your members and donors what the non-deductible portion of their dues are? Let's use round numbers, for example. Your dues to your C6 trade association on an annual basis are $1,000. If you as a C6 organization are able to calculate the amount of lobbying that you do on an annual basis, say it's 10%, you are required to send out to your member or donor that, thank you for your $1,000 membership due for the year. Be advised that 10% of your membership dues will go towards lobbying for the influencing of legislation. Therefore, only $900 of your dues to our organization can be deducted from your 1040 this year. This puts the onus on your member or your donor. Option B, and what a lot actually of C4 and C6 organizations do, including my own organization, is you pay a proxy tax on behalf of your membership on the amount of income you have over on the year at the 21% corporate income tax rate. It used to be 35 until a couple of years ago, based upon, again, the percentage of lobbying activities that you do. So using round numbers again, if your organization's income for the year is $1 million and you conduct 10% lobbying, your organization is going to pay 21% corporate taxes on $100,000 of business income. And you'll do that with your 990. This ensures that someone, whether it's the member or the organization itself, bears the cost of non-deductibility. I will say option B is obviously the more attractive option, especially if you're trying to gain membership into your organization. And trade associations a lot of times especially will pay that proxy tax because asking members to forfeit deductions can hurt not just membership gain, but also membership retention. And here's a chart that shows all of this that you can use whenever you get the slides, right? So again, for C3s, limited lobbying only, contributions are absolutely 100% deductible under Section 170 of the Internal Revenue Code. There is no proxy tax that is necessary. For C4s and C6s, we have unlimited lobbying that must further essentially the purposes of the organization. The contributions to C4s and dues to C6s are not deductible pursuant to Section 162 of the Internal Revenue Code, but the organizations can pay a proxy tax on behalf of their members or their contributors if they are not otherwise going to provide notice of the non-deductibility of the contributions to their members, donors, or contributors. And again, this, one second, Joanne, this again is only federal law. There may be specific state issues or state treatments, state lobbying, campaign finance that we need to think about that we're not going to get into today just for the interest of time. One other thing I want to talk about as well before I get to your question, Joanne, is specifically with C4s. C4 organizations, they're not political action committees, but they can form or be part of political action committees. Political action committee donations go to campaign finance and things with the Federal Election Commission. They do not implicate Internal Revenue Code issues. Two very specific things and two distinct things. So that's another thing that you want to think about if you have a C4 and you are going to get involved in political action committee issues. Go ahead, Joanne.
I just wanted to say, and this is just a minute point, but you're talking about charitable donations in general that are generally all considered tax deductible. I just wanted to say that if a donor gets a benefit from it, like going to a dinner, that portion is not considered tax deductible.
That's correct. That's correct. You can't double dip, right? That's kind of the biggest thing to think about. You cannot double dip. Okay. You know, and I think all of the rules that we've gone through and also the just the political atmosphere that we have today has shown a downward trend and a troubling trend when it comes to nonprofit lobbying and, frankly, any sort of maybe potentially controversial nonprofit advocacy. Data that we have in the nonprofit sector shows that lobbying is down significantly from 20 years ago, actually 25 years ago now. You know, in 2000, 75% of nonprofits reported they engaged in lobbying in one sort of another. That's less than 25%. And of course, we have people out there who, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to pull their C3 because they decided to wade into an issue that is against what I believe. Now, you don't have to be afraid of that. So long as you're not going above as a 501c3, that 5% substantial portion threshold, you do not have to worry about your 501c3 certificate being pulled. And you know what? When nonprofits step back because they're scared, the communities they serve then lose a voice. And that's, I think, that's really important. You guys, as 501c3s especially, but also the C4s and the C6s, you fill a vacuum that perhaps the individual citizen just can't get their voice out there. Use your education, use your calls to action, understand the rules, stay within them. But once you have the rules in your mind, then engage, because especially in today's political atmosphere, and I don't care where you are on the political spectrum, and I don't care what it is your organization does, but especially today where we are so divided as a county, as a state, and as a country, your perspective is needed now more than ever. Now, what about, though, electioneering efforts? And I've got a big red flashy here, because when we talk about C3s, this is the clearest rule in the entire presentation. It is absolutely no, and that absolutely no means absolutely no, never, don't ever, don't even think about it. This is a hard line. There's no gray area here. Any amount of electioneering, no matter how small, how minute, can put your 501c3 tax-exempt status in jeopardy. So what's actually prohibited? What is prohibited is the endorsing of candidates, contributions to campaigns, making public statements for or against anyone running for office, or distributing materials that favor or oppose candidates. I also want to throw in an idea here about referendums or ballot questions. There is a gray area there. We talked about lobbying when it comes to ballot questions and referendums, that may constitute lobbying as opposed to electioneering. And I think that's true to a certain extent. But what I would absolutely guide 501c3s on right now, especially in this political atmosphere, if there is a referendum that is going to be on the ballot or a ballot question, please be very careful in thinking about what you can and cannot do with that referendum or ballot question. Um, and all of this includes indirect activity too. You cannot wink and nod your way around this. The IRS will look at substance over form, and they will come down on you very hard here. But this is critical. Nonpartisan civic engagement is absolutely permitted. Us in the Washington County Bar Association, we do voter drives and voter education every year. Those, as long as they're open to all, and you're not targeting a specific party, 100% permitted. So are voter education materials, candidate forums, and get out the vote campaigns. Again, everything must be open to all. If you're doing a candidate forum as a 501c3 nonprofit, invite everybody. And I'm not just talking the Republican and the Democrat. If there's an independent, a Green Party, a Libertarian, an Orange Party, a Yellow Party, a Red Party, whatever it may be, invite them all to your candidate forums and apply equal rules to the forum. Because the key word in all of this is nonpartisan. If a reasonable observer would see bias, then the IRS is going to see bias as well, and you've crossed the line. So here's your practical test. Could someone from any political party look at your activity and feel that you gave everyone a fair shake? If the answer to that is yes, then you're likely fine in the activity you're doing. If the answer to that is even no, stop. That's when we get into absolutely no situations. Joanne, I saw a question come through. What is it?
Yes, it's how far does this extend to what an employee does on their own time away from work? Great
Sure.
question.
That's a really, really good question. There's a fine line here between your free speech, political speech rights under the First Amendment and what you are doing as an employee, or let's even go beyond that, an executive officer or a board member or a director of a 501c3 organization. And I think, kind of the line I would draw here is think about it in terms of workers' compensation. If someone is out there doing something and they get hurt, would their workers' compensation apply to them? Would your company's worker compensation apply to them? Are they on the job, so to speak? And again, if the answer to that is even then they probably should not get involved with it. But as an individual person, even if they are an employee of a 501c3, so long as that individual person is clearly drawing the line for themselves, can they go and work a poll for a candidate? Absolutely, they can. But they cannot be wearing, can't be wearing anything of your organization that day. They can't mention your organization that day. They can't go up to someone and go, hey, vote for Joe Smith. And oh, by the way, remember, I'm a member of ABC Corporation 501c3, and Joe's been a big supporter of ours. No, absolutely not. So it can get very dicey, but the First Amendment would trump here, but it's got to be a very, very clear delineation of what it is they're doing. They need to take a PTO day, for example, if they're going to go work the polls. They can't be on company time. It can't be a sick day either. It's got to be a personal day if you make that distinction within your organization. I hope that answers the question, because it does get very tight.
I think, sometimes, employees, especially at different particular levels, have documents that they need to sign saying, their performance outside of work not going to reflect badly on the organization.
Yeah, and I think this would be part of it. Another important part of that would be making sure your 501c3 has a conflict of interest policy, because this would absolutely fall into that as well. And if you can show that you've covered yourselves as an organization, you can't control a rogue employee, right? So if an employee goes rogue and does things, as long as you have an employee handbook, a conflict of interest policy, you have educated your employees on what you can and cannot do during an election as an employee of a 501c3, that's all things that the IRS will take very seriously, and will militate against your 501c3 status being revoked. Now, for C4s and C6s, we're going to flash a yellow here. It's be very careful, but it's not an absolute no. The electioneering rules for C4s and C6s are much more nuanced. They're not prohibited, but they are heavily caveated. Being a politically minded nonprofit does not mean that you get a blank check for political activity. There are three critical guide rails to think about here. First, the political activity must be germane to your organization's mission, vision, and programs. You cannot support random candidates unrelated to your cause. Again, I'll go back to the environmental abortion dichotomy we talked about before. If you're going to support a candidate who's running solely on a platform of no abortion, yet you are a pro-environmental group, that's not going to fly. You've got to be looking at candidates who at least publicly have talked about election issues that relate back to your mission, your vision, and your programs. Two, electioneering cannot be the primary purpose of your organization. Political activity must be secondary to your core social welfare or trade association mission. And three, and again, we talked about this before, if you want to do more, you can establish as a C4 or a C6, not a C3, but as a C4 or a C6, you can establish a political action committee. The political action committee requirements, and these are truly separate funds, separate bank accounts, separate governance, separate decision-making, records, bookkeeping, campaign finance filings with the FEC. All of this, especially under the C4s, remember, C4s are social welfare organizations. They are not political organizations. If you want to form a PAC under your C4, you have to look at the FEC regulated political universe, separate and apart from the IRS. And absolutely, do not commingle funds between your political action committee and your C4 or your C6. That is the fastest way to invite scrutiny, not just from the IRS, but also from the FEC. So again, go back to my disclaimer at the beginning. This is all educational today. Nothing here is legal advice. If you are a C4 or you're a C3 that wants to form a C4 under your umbrella and you want to get politically involved, please talk to a tax attorney. Please talk to a campaign finance attorney. Please talk to your accountant on the appropriate way to set all of that up. And of course, it's an election year. So all of this is really germane as we talk about it today. So specifically to C3s, I think we talk a lot about what C4s and C6s can do in the educational or in the political space. But what can C3s do this year as we ramp up towards the primary election later this month and then in the midterms in November? The key, again, is to remain educational and nonpartisan. All of these things that I have in this first bullet point are permitted so long as you say nonpartisan and educational. These will help people register for elections regardless of party. You can distribute factual information about issues and candidates' public positions. That's not electioneering. That is education so long as it's factual and there is zero opinion. No, blacking out someone's face to make them look like a mugshot or anything like that, right? If it's strictly a blue looking PowerPoint like this, maybe don't use blue, maybe use yellow, I don't know, purple. But make sure that there is absolutely no connection that anyone again would say, hey, biased, not biased, right? You need to be able to say with a straight face, this is not biased. Candidate questionnaires, candidate forums, at the Washington County Bar Association, I know we're a C6, but we do candidate questionnaires and and candidate forums, especially in the judicial area, all the time. That would be permissible for C3s to do. What is not allowed are endorsements, contributions, rating candidates as a C3, coordinating with campaigns, or using your organizational resources to support or oppose specific candidates. We can't say Senator Bartolotta gets an A+ from our organization because she supports conservative issues that our organization enjoys and proffers, right? Can't do that. All right, pop quiz time. Let's test everyone's knowledge here. We're going to go through 6 different scenarios, and we're going to say, is this advocacy, is this lobbying, or is this electioneering? So number 1, here's how our program services families in your specific congressional or legislative district. That is advocacy and education, right? So long as we are not getting into, again, any bias or any, we like that you're our congressman in our district because you support our programs and our services, right? We're in the clear there. House Bill 123 would reduce access to the services our nonprofit provides. Please oppose it, Representative Jones. That's lobbying. That is direct lobbying. Again, prohibited? Not necessarily. Just cannot, as a C3, go beyond that substantial contribution test. So if House Bill 123 would, for example, ensure that your organization would go out of business, you can lobby on it. You can talk to your legislators about it, but you need to be very careful about calculating the amount of time and money you're putting into it. Do not cross that 5% threshold. And I would say stay under that 5% threshold. Don't go above 2 or 3. Let's not give the IRS or anyone else who may be opposed to your organization the ability to say, you guys went beyond that here, and now we're going to pull your 501c3 status. Our membership should call their senators to ask them to support Senate Bill 456. Or actually, let's even go back to the House Bill 123 example. This is grassroots lobbying. Your direct lobbying and your grassroots lobbying are not 2 separate categories that you each get 5% for. They would be combined getting into your 5%. So you need to, again, think about both of those if you're going to get involved in lobbying as a C3 at all, and think about, okay, if we do both of these things, is that going to take us above the substantial part threshold? Register to vote. The deadline to register will be a few weeks before the November general election. This is nonpartisan advocacy and education. This would not constitute any sort of lobbying or electioneering. Voting by mail is the easiest way to vote for your favorite Democratic candidate. That's electioneering. Okay. You're not mentioning a candidate by name, but you are mentioning an election specifically and a political party. That would be electioneering. If you take out the word Democratic, it is likely going to go out of electioneering and into advocacy and education. But even that statement, I would want to numb a little bit. Maybe don't say the easiest. Because easiest, that's an opinion. Take all opinion out of the statement. Make it completely educational and factual. And finally, vote for John Doe because he supports the mission of this Christian-centered organization. And that may be also the easiest thing we see here. This is absolutely electioneering that a 501c3 100% cannot do, and a C4 and a C6 need to be careful. Joanne, do we have another question come in? Okay.
But I did have a question about,
Go ahead.
with the nonprofits, 501c3s now, and the change to the tax bill from last year, and then the how it's impacting this year and next year as well. I know the Association of Fundraising Professionals did take to lobbying, let's say, and but it was a bipartisan effort. And I think, I don't know if you have a comment regarding that.
Again, even if it's non or bipartisan, if you're talking specifically about a piece of legislation, it is going to be considered lobbying.
Okay.
So, and again, it's a two-part test, right? Is it a specific piece of legislation, and to whom is your audience, right? Is your audience the legislator, or is your audience just your general membership or the community at large? If you're talking in a nonpartisan way and educating about a specific piece of legislation, and you're not targeting a legislator in regard to what you're saying, it is going to be advocacy and education as opposed to lobbying. Your audience there is going to be key. If you're trying to direct your statements, whether indirectly or directly, to a specific legislator, now we may be getting into lobbying.
We do have another question.
Okay.
Would the answer be different if you said contact your legislator with your view and do not suggest how to vote?
No, because your view is an opinion that is going to go to the suggestion. So if you're going to tell your membership to contact Representative Jones about House Bill 123, or Senator Joe about Senate Bill 456, and just say, contact your membership, tell them how you feel. Well, if you're a member or a donor of a specific organization, then you can pretty much guarantee that how they feel is going to match the mission vision of your organization, and whether your organization would be supporting or against a specific piece of legislation. That would almost guaranteed to be grassroots lobbying.
Do we have any other questions in general, or?
So here's some websites for some additional resources that you can find on the internet. All of these websites speak to what guide rails there are on political activity as a nonprofit organization, and some of them specifically what they do. The first and the last, I cannot recommend enough. The Pennsylvania Association of Nonprofit Organizations, especially in regard to specific Pennsylvania-based resources, is an absolutely invaluable resource for 501c organizations. Their membership's a little pricey. I understand that, and I know budgets are tight. But especially if you want to maybe not hire an attorney and you want to get some really quick and good advice, I cannot recommend PANO's website enough. The final website, the IRS's website, everything we talked about today is in black letter regulation and law on irs.gov in their charitable and nonprofit organization site on the website. Lots of good information there. The feds are also very good at kind of dating every time they put something new on the website. And usually the newest guidance is at the top of a website, and then you can scroll down to older guidance. So the IRS, EPA, and some other federal government organizations are really good at that. So I highly recommend the IRS's website as well. And just the big takeaway from today: advocacy, again, and education is essential to any nonprofit organization. Encourage it. Be nonpartisan. Be the helpful teacher. Be the educator. You should absolutely be doing these things, and you shouldn't be scared about it. And the same with lobbying, right? It is possible with the right guardrails, so long as you are ensuring, especially as a C3, that you are not passing that substantial test or substantial part test threshold. Electioneering, especially for C3s, clear, bright, red, thou shalt not cross lines. So please make sure you're really careful about that. The goal is not to avoid political engagement. In fact, the goal should be to engage politically as much as you can within your mission vision. It's just to do it smartly within the rules. My contact information is on this slide that I know Joanne will be sending out to everyone. Again, everyone, your nonprofit's voice, it matters. Do not let uncertainty about these rules keep you silent. Get informed, get engaged, stay involved, make a difference in our community and your own organizations. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And I'm happy to take any more questions if anyone has any.
Todd, we just want to thank you so much. I certainly agree with you about piano. It's a wonderful resource for Pennsylvania. Of course, that IRS guidelines, they'll keep you going. So you can certainly look towards that as well. Since we're at the 1 o'clock hour, we just want to say this was particularly a critical issue, particularly during this time, in that encouraging your nonprofit to engage civically and civilly, and that you're making an impact in the community, and there maybe extend your reach in certain areas. So I've had several questions this week talking about advocacy, and it's important. It should be on a lot of people's minds.
Absolutely.
I just want to say the next session in our nonprofit leadership and engagement series will be Wednesday, August 12th at noon with Kelly Swift from CASA, Kelly Proudfit from Washington Area Humane Society, and Alexander Brooks from Domestic Violence of Southwestern PA, and they're presenting on annual appeals. And that will just be about a month before the WCCF Gives Day, and just to encourage nonprofits how to reach out to their donors in the community. Thanks to all those who participated in today's session, and thanks again to Todd
Thank you,
for his
Joanne.
outstanding presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to the foundation, and I hope you continue to have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.